In the summer of 2020, there was nowhere in America where people weren't protesting the murder of George Floyd. The national conversation on policing seemed inescapable. People were calling to defund the police. People were running on defunding the police. The idea that the system isn't broken, it's working as intended, had entered the mainstream and finally seemingly exposed the uselessness of continuing to call for the usual police reform. But in 2026, whilst local and national organizers, activists, and advocates have continued doing the work, for everyday people, the fight against policing no longer seems to be part of the national conversation or their political non-negotiables. And what I want to get to the bottom of is why. Why does it feel like policing has been kicked off the progressive agenda? What does the current criminal justice landscape look like as it pertains to policing? What's changed since 2020? Did we defund the police? Did defund the police hurt or help the movement? I had so many questions. And to help me get some answers to them, I spoke to author of End of Policing, professor and community safety advisor to New York City Mayor ZOHRAN MAMDANI, Alex Vitale. And I spoke to journalist, professor, and host of Empire City, Chenjerai Kumanyika. My name is Olay, and this is O Squared. As someone whose number one issue is always policing in the prison industrial complex, the years 2020 to maybe 2022 will always stand out to me because it's the only time I can remember where it felt like policing in the prison industrial complex was just as much a priority to everyone else as well. So it didn't go unnoticed when we went from people protesting policing and police brutality every single day to barely a collective peep when police shot and killed a 1-year-old black baby just the other day. Even if you hadn't noticed any shift in how much collective attention is being paid to policing, I'm sure that now that it's being brought to your attention, the minimum we can probably agree on is that if the police killed a 1-year-old black baby in 2020, you'd have likely heard about it. Whereas, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first many of you are hearing about Cohen Wiley's murder. But perception isn't always reality. So I wanted to talk to the experts and find out if they'd noticed how little political real estate policing was occupying these days.
Well, I think it's true in the sense of like local police, for the most part.
So if it's true that we aren't hearing as much about policing anymore, the question then becomes, why?
You know, the media is an extension of policing in a lot of ways. The newspapers, the television stations at the local level are part of a growth politics for these cities that has relied on policing to enable gentrification, clearing out spaces, managing suspect populations. So it's not that the media just sort of like misunderstand policing, it's that they work with the police. These two things, they go together. Yeah. So they are inherently inclined towards framing everything in a way that gives police the benefit of the doubt because they are fundamentally pro-police. And so that always frames why we're not hearing about things or why we don't hear about them in a way that makes clear what's really going on. So we've got to rely more on independent media and community organizing. But of course, a lot of attention is being paid to ICE right now. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, they see the similarities, they see the analogies there, that Trump is basically, weaponizing this federal police capacity that is targeting suspected immigrants, whatever, but I think a lot of people understand that this could be weaponized in even more ways to go after political enemies, to suppress resistance to Trump's, illegal behavior, to potentially interfere in elections, etc. So I think that in a way, people are kind of learning a lesson about what the true nature of policing is.
Alex pointed out as well that ICE, there's a lot of a national conversation around ICE, and in a way that is still, part of the conversation of policing. But I think the issue is yes and no. The ICE are police. That critique should be, whatever critiques about ICE, we should be tying it to policing and that this is a reflection of our police state expanding and how that police state functions and gets worse. But I don't see it being discussed that way. I see ICE being talked about in this uniquely evil way, like ICE is bad. The reason I know they're not connecting ICE to policing policing is based on how little pushback there is to abolish ICE as there is to defund the police or abolish the police in general. The minute you say you're an abolitionist, there are so many people because they're seeing ICE as a especially bad agency. It's kind of the problem with always why when people would be like, we need to close Rikers and not replace it with anything. You know, why they had to say Rikers and no new jails, because people were acting as though the soil on Rikers is what's so inherently evil as opposed to police, this prison industrial complex in general, right? The prison itself. And so I think we see a similar thing here. It's like ICE is a bad agency. ICE is this rogue agency as opposed to ICE is the police. ICE is the police we're watching. What we're seeing from ICE is, to me, very similar to exactly what we were seeing from the police all summer 2020. We're going to get back to analyzing ICE as a policing issue, trust me. But before we do that, we need to understand the fight against policing and mass incarceration more broadly and what progress we've made or haven't made since 2020.
So I think on the one hand, we have not made much progress in dismantling policing, in reducing its scope and its legitimacy, broadly, and certainly not like reducing police budgets significantly. But where we have made significant progress is in investments in the kinds of alternatives to policing that a lot of people have been asking for in the last 5+ years. So we have seen a massive expansion in civilian mental health crisis response. Hundreds of cities now and whole states are building out these civilian crisis response capacities as an alternative to policing. We've also seen hundreds of millions of dollars being put into community-based violence reduction initiatives, so-called Cure Violence or credible messenger programs that are really independent of policing in the criminal legal system. And we have the one area where we have seen some concrete depolicing, I would say, is in schools. A number of cities have either eliminated or significantly scaled back their school policing and have invested more in counselors and support services and those kinds of things.
How come you think they've made more of those initiatives in schools than anywhere else?
Well, I think that there was a lot of organizing going on, especially in 2020, and I think also really strong data. Basically, every study ever done shows that school police do not keep school children safer and that it comes with a lot of negative consequences. So I think that's part of it. I think there's also just sort of this intuitive sense of like, why are we using police against our children? So we have a huge way to go on that, but that is an area where we have seen some concrete progress. And I think there was a tremendous effort by local and national organizations, from the ACLU to the Advancement Project to, the Californian down. Lots of players were really tuned in to the dramatic racial disparities in both school disciplinary policies and more directly school policing, and the way that it was criminalizing primarily young people of color, young people with disabilities, LGBTQ populations, and that it just wasn't producing any measurable benefits. And so that organizing really showed some payoff at the local level.
To really appreciate why the implementation of these alternatives to policing are such significant wins, you need to understand just how ineffective the previous default responses to the issue of policing have been. Some of the initiatives, obviously, that they most like to throw out after any incident of police brutality or something gets national attention is like, oh, we need more body camera footage. We need more this. We need more training, more this.
Yeah. Well, these things really fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the problem that we're dealing with. They imagine that there's this possibility of creating like lawful and just policing, and that if the police would just follow the rules and do policing the way it's supposed to be done, that it wouldn't be so racist and abusive. But the racism and the abusiveness are built in. They're inherent. If you don't want racism, if you don't want abuse, don't get the police involved. Right. Don't use police to solve your problems, because it automatically comes with those things. And that's why the kinds of reforms that have been floating around since Ferguson, Missouri, have failed to produce any results. The officers that killed George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020 were wearing body cameras, had implicit bias training, had de-escalation training, were operating under more restrictive use of force policies, were operating under a bystander policy that required officers to intervene if they see misconduct, and none of it made any difference. George Floyd's life did not matter to them.
Yeah.
And that is the real issue, because policing is a source of danger and injustice. And we need to solve our problems in ways other than relying on them. And that's how we eliminate the racism and the abuse. Look, between 1.25% of all people killed by police in the United States are having a mental health crisis. And if we want to save those lives, we got to quit wasting our political energy trying to retrain police to not be police.
Right.
And we got to send someone other than the police. We've got to build out community-based mental health services. That's how we save lives. That's how we reduce the horrible, racially disproportionate outcomes. That's how we stop the violence, is to get the police out of that business.
Tell me about some of the places that have implemented some of these alternatives and how those are going.
Yeah. So Denver, for instance, was one of the first big cities to really robustly implement a mental health crisis response that's civilian-based, the STAR program. And early on, they could only do certain neighborhoods at a time, and they did some studies, and they said, let's compare the outcomes in the neighborhoods where we have the STAR program and where we don't. And they found they were saving money, there was less violence, there were better outcomes, and also crime went down more broadly. Because, of course, some of the people responsible for harmful behavior in the community were people with mental health problems that weren't being addressed. And once we started actually addressing their problems, then they didn't do harmful things to the rest of the community.
Right.
So this is just incredibly an effective, cost-effective, and just way to address this. So other cities are doing this. Albuquerque has been doing this for a while, and they are expanding their program that's dealing also with folks who are unhoused, substance use issues, and even into the area of domestic violence. Other cities are using these teams to do welfare checks, and a lot of police violence happens in exactly these kinds of circumstances. It is not, there's an armed bank robbery happening and we go have a shootout. No, it was a welfare check where someone is startled, picks up a gun in their nightstand thinking there's an intruder in the home, and then the police shoot them.
Exactly.
And so let's just eliminate those potentially dangerous encounters.
From the moment Defund the Police emerged as a slogan, an initiative, a policy, however you choose to characterize it, it was controversial. Defund the Police was a call to stop overinvesting in policing year after year to no avail, and to instead take some of that money from policing, defund, and invest it into alternatives to policing in the community and its infrastructure itself. Despite the very reasonable goal of defunding the police, it was controversial, both to those who misunderstood it, which was most of the people talking shit, and it was also controversial to those who understood it, but opposed it anyway because they prefer to continue sinking money into expanding police forces and prison populations. But I was curious to know what Alex and Chenjerai thought about Defund the Police and what effects they believe it had on the larger fight against the prison industrial complex.
Yeah, I never had any particular allegiance to that three-word phrase. It was always a kind of shorthand that could fit on a protest sign or a Twitter hashtag. And I appreciated it as an alternative to police reform or jail killer cops, but it never captured the alternatives, the investments, the reprioritization aspects of what we've been calling for as a movement. So I don't need to, die on the hill defending that three-word phrase. I remain committed to the vision behind it, to the political analysis, and I think the way we move forward is through very concrete local campaigns demanding these alternatives and demanding the dialing back of policing. Let's get them out of drugs, out of sex work, out of schools, out of gang suppression, and let's build up the alternatives.
But I think that once defund the police really started to get, kind of get out there as a slogan, as an idea, for various reasons, the Democratic establishment in particular was like, obviously Republicans and conservatives weren't, and they hated it, but Democrats hated it. And
Yeah.
you know, they backed away from it so far, and I think Republicans were so effective at using that against the movement. And by the way, I just got to say, it could be that, you know, defund was maybe not something that was about to resonate with enough of the masses of people. I'm interested to get your take on that. But I will say this: what I liked was that it got the conversation away simply from like, oh, it was a mistake, it was a chokehold of the offer. Now we're talking about budgets. Why are we putting this much into this? We're actually been looking at budgets.
It made it a policy conversation instead of just it felt moral before, always moral and more always reform based, and it made it about like actual policy.
Exactly, and it really made question our priorities. So I think after that, it's like it never the sort of momentum around policing never returned. It was like politicians learned they had to stay, which is crazy when you have not only an uptick in the violence, racial profiling, you know, and you know all the things that you cooked Eric Adams on, but of course these things got worse after that conversation with you and Eric Adams.
Yeah.
And New York and around the country. And then, of course, we get, you know, like probably the largest policing agency ever in ICE at a time when folks aren't talking about police.
How do you feel? I'm interested to know your thoughts as my premier abolitionist thinker. Because I feel like there's a similar response to abolition. You know, I don't really see any difference in how people respond to defund the police versus the minute they hear abolition. Like as somebody who like packages content and arguments or whatever, I have found that even if you say the word abolition one time, you know what I mean? Like one time at any point from that moment, it's always like people can't hear. They're so busy fighting the imaginary boogeyman of what they think abolition is in your head. And like, for example, I think in my How Women Become Carceral Feminists like video, I discussed being an abolitionist at the beginning of that. And I noticed how that colored some of the reception versus my most recent production that you're in, There Are No Monsters, Only People. That entire video is an abolitionist framework, but I never use the word. But the entire video is that, and they love it. And people were so receptive to that versus when they heard the word. I feel like they respond similarly to defund the police. How do you feel about that? How do you make the distinction in your brain?
Well, it's the same sort of thing. I don't lead with this abolition term or language when I'm talking to the general public. You know, if someone asks me directly, I will try to explain what I mean by that and own it. But I think we just need to talk concretely about the ideas, the proposals, etc. Abolition is a shorthand among activists and academics so that we can talk a little bit more efficiently about the differences between like reform and accountability and replacing policing and jails with and prisons with something better. So there are spaces where that's what we need to talk about. If I go into an academic space, for instance, or I'm in a meeting with criminal justice policy people, then yes, we need to fight those battles.
Yeah.
And abolition is a term that we can use in those battles. But, you know, I didn't say the word abolition this whole conversation until, you know, you specifically asked me to comment on it. I don't feel the need to convert people to thinking of themselves as abolitionists per se. Yeah. What I need is for people to see the inherent fundamental flaws of policing and prisons and to imagine the alternatives and to demand them.
Do you think it hurt or helped us or just made, you know, as immaterial, like abolition kind of getting pushed into like mainstream discourse?
I mean, it's possible that in the short run, there was some harm to it, possibly. In the long run, though, I mean, we're winning these arguments in a lot of spaces. A lot of people have switched their analysis. A lot of organizations that wasted years demanding body cameras and implicit bias training don't do that anymore because the analysis has shifted in our direction. Yeah. So I think, again, be strategic, focus on what you really want. We don't need to play word games. We need to win concrete victories.
Whether we like the messaging of defund the police or not, we seem to have largely abandoned that messaging as a collective. So what kind of messaging should we embrace to best advocate around these issues?
I'm aside, this is like a little spicy. I know some people might not like it, but I actually think that I'm in conversation and work with a lot of scholars and organizers, but there are some of us who the language we speak is so like theoretical and sometimes like the way we talk about these issues can't really resonate with the most impacted people on the issues, you know? Like, we're not having the conversation, and maybe we sound, you know, I don't know if we sound condescending, like you should know this, and we're not being sensitive to why people, you know, and I want to implicate myself sometimes. I'm sure I probably sound like that, but I love the platform that you're creating. And this is in a way where I think some of the people who are in social media, who people want to be like, oh, you know, whatever, like they want to talk about influencers, but I'm like, where is the conversation happening in a register that regular people can really follow and debate and dialogue and win a shared analysis?
So I think that we need to keep this conversation at the local level. I think that we're not going to make any progress in Washington, even often at the state level. I think that we need to keep focusing this as a local issue. And I think there is room for growth here in this effort. And I think, of course, the best example is New York City, where MAMDANI campaigned. He was the only candidate in both the primary and the general election who said he wasn't going to hire more police. And he said, instead, we're going to invest in these community-based alternatives. And he won by a huge amount. So it shows that if we take the time to offer people a credible alternative, that there is interest in this. And I think that's what's really been lacking at the local level in a lot of places, is a kind of coalition between community-based groups concerned about safety, concerned about police abuse, and credible people running for office.
Yeah.
And really the only source, the primary source of people running for office with these kinds of ideas has been the Democratic Socialists of America. They have not given up this issue. They have kept it front and center. And I think that that's where the hope lies right now.
One problem with that is that people are providing the same failed reforms when they talk about ICE. Like we saw a couple of Democrats sign on to funding ICE. We'll get them, you know, training, and they're using all these ideas, training and body cams, and maybe they'll take off the as though that is, and you see that utterly is like that. Of course, it's not working with ICE because it doesn't work with police. But the other thing I see, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but you're really good at sort of like pressing us, provoking us on these contradictions, which also involve who we really care about. So I know I've seen some people get really frustrated because while you are seeing like this tremendous pushback and national outcry against ICE, there's regular old black and brown folks, you know, getting harassed by police just like they were before, and that doesn't seem to provoke outrage. So I understand that some people are like, man, this feels like a problem when, you know, it's not that people aren't, you know, people are glad that ICE is being spoken about, but they're like, you're forgetting just the everyday policing, right? And I think that, you know, I always think about it as an organizer, so I always try to say, well, that is a contradiction and that's a problem, but maybe there's an opportunity to say, okay, if you get what's wrong with ICE, maybe you were somebody before who thought it was fine if black people are getting stopped and frisked in your neighborhood, and you know, this stuff that has real consequences in people's lives, like now you got to go to court, now you got to pay these fees, like that's happening every day, all the time. You're getting incarcerated, or you might be getting shot. I mean, we've seen an uptick. In a minute, we can talk about the new report that's come out. The NPR just reported that where there's been like a major uptick in police killings, you know. But maybe you're somebody who was cool with that, but not cool with ICE. But maybe that's an entry point for me as an organizer to say, if you understand this is wrong, now you got to understand and be willing to stand up against this whole thing, because these are the same things.
I don't think they understand it. I think the exact same blind spots that existed when it came to how they saw policing exist now. I think what I've been able to see about America is America goes through cycles where different issues, like in the same way different clothes go in style, different shows have their season, different everything. America acts like that about political issues, and only about what they see as the most outrageous thing that's on the news. Like in the sense of in 2020, in like, the rise of the protests after George Floyd, you see everybody is protesting the murder of George Floyd, and I think it's really important that people see what they were protesting. They were protesting the murder of George Floyd. They were not, it doesn't matter if they were participating in what the chants were, what the organizers intended, and they were holding the signs and whatever. It has been very clear based on what their understanding has been, what they've supported following that with the masses, how the masses responded to the conversation about policing and the outrage about defund and all these different things. It was very clear. They were protesting, seeing this video of this black man lose his life, like, seeing that moved their conscience, that shocked their conscience, but they never understood that in order to prevent, they were protesting that, and they wanted Derek Chauvin incarcerated for it. They never wanted to do anything about the material conditions that put Derek Chauvin on that corner in the first place. And that was very clear. And similarly now, okay, everybody's like, okay, ICE bad, ICE killing people in the street. But everybody, you've seen an ambivalence toward immigration in general. People aren't asking for more paths to citizenship. They aren't recognized. They aren't having a larger conversation about what immigrants deserve. Shoots. I literally just, Elon Musk, and when Donald Trump and Elon Musk were attacking H-1Bs and work visas and all this and the next thing, there were all kind of people like Bernie and them jumping up to like co-sign it in under the guise of this is, pro-American, worrying about the pro-American working class. Like, that's how it gets packaged when it's not. Sometimes his package is outright bigotry. Sometimes his package is caring about, worrying about Americans. Sometimes his package is ambivalence. All these different ways. But ultimately, most people who are outraged about ICE are not also saying, hey, this is why we need more paths to citizenship. This is why it should be easier to get a work visa. This is why it should be easier to get a green card. Like, that larger conversation, I think they have the exact same blind spots, the same disconnect between what they're protesting. They're protesting the murder of Renee. These murders that they're seeing, the horrifying stories. That always shocks America's conscience. But when it comes to what allowed for that horrible thing to happen, I don't think they ever got it. And I still don't think they get it.
Before we get to that, I agree with you. And I think I really like what you're saying, which is these spectacles happen, these horrific spectacles, and people get up in arms. But it's our job as a movement to deepen that conversation, right? And sometimes we think it's happening because of that moment of mobilization. Everybody's on the street and we think that everybody's getting it. But you're right. I think that the education is not deep enough to say, if you feel this way about ICE, it's not just about abolishing this institution, which hasn't even been around that long. It's about a deeper conversation about immigration. And that means like, we're still dealing with a situation where, when Darlisa won the election, you had Democrats. You even had people on the company I work with, Crooked Media, using scare tactics of, she believes in open borders. Okay, but let's talk. What is a border, though? I mean, at some point, we have to have a conversation about history. How did we get to this point? A real conversation about immigration. And so leading Democrats are scared to have that. They're shook to have that conversation. And, I guess, but one question I have for you on that note, and by the way, similarly with the rest of policing, like, I love what you said. There are conditions that put George Floyd in that situation. There are conditions that put all kinds of folks in these situations where they wind up, having these encounters. And we got to talk about that. But coming back to immigration, I mean, so many people seem to buy the common sense of what is put out about immigration, that sort of like there's a right way to do it. And I don't know. Quite frankly, look, I got folks in my family who have immigrated, and even some of the folks in my family are like, they're looking back like they haven't even been in here that long, and they already looking back, judging somebody who's trying to get in. So I don't know from your standpoint, if you think, what do you think the sort of what do you understand where people's understanding of this is? Because to me, in a way, these killings where people are getting shot in the street, all kinds of folks, regardless of citizenship, this should open people's eyes that this was never actually about citizenship. It wasn't even about borders. It was about control. But I'm not sure it's a problem when you got brown people signing up for ICE.
I say this to people, like, me being a public defender, or me being a lawyer, me being a criminal defense attorney is not what made me at the politic I have. I know public defenders who believe, they did it, they should go to jail. You know what I mean? Like, they fully believe that the system needs both sides or whatever. In terms of it's what you believe and what you're educated to. To address your point earlier of seeing some brown people and people who've had immigrants in their family and stuff wanting to sign up for ICE, it's like they're still being indoctrinated in the same fuck ass system. So many people are taught that their conditions are just, but also so many people come to rationalize it that way. I told y'all that we would get back to ICE and immigration because ICE is very much a policing issue in a country that chooses to criminalize immigrants. I just saw a clip of a man, a U.S. citizen. He gets detained by ICE, and so he called the police. So like he called 911 for help, and he's like, "Hey, like help me, like I'm being or whatever detained by ICE." And they're like, "Oh, we can't help you." And he's like, "No, but I'm a U.S. citizen or whatever." And they were like, "Oh, we can't help you." And he was like, "I'm calling for help. I'm a U.S. citizen."
Oh
being
yeah, I
walked
saw
through
that.
by-"
He was literally in the car, kidnapped.
Yes.
Talking to 911. He's like, "They've got me. This is wrong." And then there's nothing. And then the ICE, the police or whatever, they're like laughing at the dude, and he's like,
911, what is your emergency?
Hi, I'm being kidnapped. I don't know where they're taking me.
I'm a U.S. citizen, and I was detained
You're touching a USA citizen right there.
for 5 days. I actually called 911.
I'm just in the van and I don't know where they're taking me.
You are with Border Patrol.
Okay, yes, but I'm a U.S. citizen and I'm hurt and I need an ambulance.
So, I cannot take your call. You're going to have to speak to them and wait for them to...
Okay, I'm only speaking with you because I need help.
Right, and I cannot send you help, sir.
I just hear the officers just laughing. They took the picture of me with the face recognition. You hear them laughing, high-fiving themselves like, "Hey, how many did you get? How many did you get?" You know, "Oh, I got 18, I got 5, I got 6. Yeah, you know, high-fiving. You know, all of a sudden, it got alerted again, like who I was, and they seen that I was a U.S. citizen. So that's when then, you know, awkward silence.
in fact, one last thing I want to say that's so wild is that we've gone so far backward, I think, in the conversation about police, that people actually talk about policing like that's the solution to ICE. I'm seeing police come on like with that. Those ICE, they're not doing what we do. And it's like, no, they're doing exactly what y'all do.
And the problem is the people who know better are not in a position to speak, because when you're an immigrant, legal, undocumented, documented, whatever, you are at the mercy of the United States government. Especially, you see it now, like even now, Trump don't give a what the laws, the rules are, the policies. He writing shit, and the next day is, oh, whatever, just doing whatever. They could just decide. Now they want your social media given to them on your forms. They monitoring this, they monitoring that. You can't say anything. You have to go apply for visas, this and the next thing, and you're not in a position to go speak publicly. And you always gotta think about it like this. Even like, and I'm saying that as somebody with a platform. It's like, think about it. Like, I have a platform and I've spoken about many things or whatever, but championing immigration in specific puts me in a certain amount of vulnerability and danger, because it's one thing when people think they wish that black bitch would shut up. That's a whole different thing. But when you say you're an immigrant and they think they have the ability to make you shut up in their mind. Now, let me go and threaten you. Let me call this agency. Let me do this. Let me do that. Let me do this. So it puts you, even to try to speak about the immigrant perspective, you make yourself vulnerable the moment you even highlight like, oh, I am an immigrant. You can't, because now it's different. And if you think the United States, Listen, if you knew, I had a green card interview and it was some scary shit. Okay, it was some scary shit. So I'm telling you, that's why there's no way to correct the narrative. And like, you're this voiceless population that nobody can speak for and nobody thinks they're speaking to because you can't speak up.
Right. And for you to actually speak up, they have actually mechanisms where they can actually make your situation. And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, I'm part of the American Association of University Professors. You know, I'm on the national council of that organization. And we sued Trump versus Rubio. We won. And then we were talking about ideological deportation. So we actually won based on, you know, looking at what had been done in cases like Mahmoud Khalil, those students you talked about, Rumeysa Ozturk. You know, one thing that was interesting about that was, first of all, it was so egregious. And, you know, it's like, you know, we see that Mahmoud Khalil is still in that battle. I think Rumeysa Ozturk chose to self-deport. But like, you know, we had the ICE. I actually went to court for those battles. And I mean, for that court case, the federal court in Massachusetts. And they had, you know, one of the ICE agents who was like, before he had been working on like international drug, something to do with terrorism. And he said he was pulled off that. And they told this guy, go arrest this student because she wrote a letter. And he said, even to him, to this ICE, it was so wild. He said he had to actually check with a higher up. Like, is this okay? We're about to kidnap her for what? But despite that, what made this case tricky was part of what you're saying. Like, we had a whole case. We had a very good legal team. To find people who could actually speak up. I mean, these are people to whom egregious things have been done, and it was very hard for us to find the people who could be plaintiffs. One other example I want to bring in that's really interesting. You know, you see what's playing out in Delaney Hall and over in Newark, New Jersey. This massive ICE detention center in Newark that has been the site of protests and just horrible conditions as they are all over the country. I've been there a couple times. There's people who have been out there consistently. I've come over a couple times to try to participate, and you know, you have really courageous warriors like this woman, Gabriela Soto, who has sort of been leading a call for the prisoners. She's also married to Martin Soto, who's one of the detainees. They have a website called La Huelga where you can hear the voice of those detainees. But here's to your point. Like, I thought, you're talking about the facility where people have died, people are medical neglect, just egregious stuff. I thought you would see all of that. But because they have to be so careful that when they're writing the letters, those letters are like, they're giving you the information, but they're very careful. They're actually apologizing. They're like, we're sorry that we're here. They have to be so apologetic. And that kind of really made the point that you're making. Like, these people are experiencing outright illegal abuse, and yet they almost have to appear deferential because it could affect the outcome of their case.
Yeah. I always tell people, it's like, think about what we mean, what we understand it to mean about a person standing when we say that someone's treated like a second-class citizen, and then think about what it means to have no citizenship at all in a place. That's what I wish, like, how people would see it. Like, think about it like this. Mahmoud Khalil had a green card. These are not undocumented people. None of who we're talking about. These aren't people who are out of state. These are people who are lawfully there. And because they said something that the current administration didn't like, not that they don't have the right to say, not in this country that apparently have free speech or other, not just people have this idea, but the law goes to reflect it. Because, the United States, the Supreme Court has rendered multiple decisions deciding like you only need a rational basis to discriminate against immigrants. If you discriminate against on the basis of race or whatever, we'll subject that to strict scrutiny. You discriminate on the basis of gender or intermediate scrutiny. Oh, immigrants? Rational basis. Any bullshit that you say is totally fine because there's an accepted legal understanding that immigrants shouldn't have the same kind of freedoms and rights as everybody else, and everybody subscribes to that. So when you look at Mahmoud Khalil and different people who've been detained, like, think about what it means that they can, like, to be an immigrant is to never be able to breathe comfortably because they're denaturalizing people. What does citizenship mean for me as an immigrant if they could take it away from me?
I think one of your main points is if we were really able to hear from the folks who really live this in a serious way as like the leading voices in this conversation, it would be different. It would probably be even different than, like, I'm pretty leftist person, and what part of what I think that means is that we need to listen. We need to create more spaces to listen to those folks. And even if it kind of pushes on our politics or, these are things that we need to really deepen the conversation. And, one of the reasons I called my show Empire City is because these are also empire politics, right? This is about the fact that in the end of the day, and I think the masks are kind of off in America, nobody's life counts if you're not a certain kind of elite white person, right? I mean, it's like, because when I think about what you've described, when I think about all these things, when I think about the deaths, the killing of Lorenzo Salgado, I've been driving my daughter back and forth to camp, and I'm like, what would it mean that, like, somebody just stops you and kills you? Or this person this week, Joan Sebastian Guerrero, it's like, and then you think about Palestinians, right? You think about what is the value of a Palestinian life that this many people can be killed? Then you think about Sudan, and you're like, wait a minute, even Palestinians, Sudan is probably like the biggest scale crisis. People just brush it off. We don't value, it's like, so these are like empire politics. And the thing about empire is that people always justify it when it's outside the borders, right? They're always like, oh, we're protecting you from these people outside, but it always comes back inside.
I mean, I think that there is an urgency to the ICE issue, and that we need to be clear that mask bans and body cameras are going to get us nothing, or less than nothing. Like, they're just going to use the body cam footage against the activists. Yeah. It's certainly, there is no system for quote unquote accountability for these federal police. So what difference does it make whether or not there's body camera footage? Yeah. I mean, the public already knows. We know what they do. What we need is the political power to put a stop to it. And that means not just focusing on the abuses of the police, of the ICE agents and Homeland Security investigations and border, patrol, etc. No, we have to directly challenge the politics of demonizing immigrants. Yeah. Full stop.
Yes.
We have to lean into a pro immigrant position. When Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, started shipping migrants to New York and Chicago and Washington, D.C., these Democratic mayors were losing their shit, saying, oh my God, it's so awful. They're ruining my city by sending all these immigrants. We've got to stop them. It's so cynical, and we need the federal government to come bail us out. And basically, I think that's a big reason why Trump won the election.
Yeah.
Is because Democratic mayors totally leaned into and justified anti-immigrant sentiment.
Yep.
And
I
what they
completely
should
agree.
have said was send more.
Yeah.
Send
I
more. That's how we
agree.
built New York City. Yes, it's going to be disruptive in the short run, just as it was in 1900 and 1850 and 1830. And sure, there will be some disruption, and we do need some federal help, but send more. This is great. It's going to revitalize the city. It's revitalizing whole parts of the country, and this is great.
I think xenophobia is popular all around the world because people like having somebody to other, and it's something
Right.
that they have been fed seemingly neutral like justifications for why this is okay. So when you'll hear people is like, well, we can't just let in everybody. Like, they've been taught this idea that the country has a finite amount of resources and that we are in danger of losing if these people come here. There's something to be lost. We are in danger. This is being done to protect us. Even like the concept of borders. It's the same way, like I used to tell people when I talk about like prisons, is like, you're thinking of prisons like water and air and stuff and not as man-made institutions. And similarly, people do not think of borders as man-made institutions. Like, they don't think of it. They think of it as like, well, we have a country and they have a country and da-da-da, and everybody has somewhere to belong and they're supposed to stay there and whatever, and it's supposed to be a limited amount of special. They've been taught that this is a perfectly justifiable reason to exclude others. And so I think that's already like the beginning premise to why there's so much inherent aversion. People don't even think that they don't even think it's a responsible position to be pro-open borders or pro-immigration. They've been taught that there's supposed to be a limit. Like, it's supposed to inherently be some kind of guardrail, some kind of system for this. People, especially if we're talking America, Americans haven't even been thought to consider the fact that this isn't a criminal process. Like, this isn't even supposed to be criminalized. Like, why is immigration being treated as a criminal issue? People are being incarcerated. You're incarcerating people.
Right.
Like, even think about what the system is. When they arrest somebody or they arrest somebody, they detain somebody, they don't just send them home. Like, that's not what happens. They are detaining people and treating them like criminals, even though technically this is not a crime. Immigrating is not a crime. It's the same way, like, when the police, who should not be involved in traffic crimes, pull you over, the police have the option for you commit some kind of traffic infraction. They can give you a ticket. They can give you a ticket, or they could choose to arrest you. But most times you would expect that they give you the ticket. That's how how it should be theoretically. And yet you should think about immigration similarly. It's like, this is not a crime. In the same way, a traffic infraction, you don't have to think about that as a crime until they've taken it to the level, I'm going to arrest you and treat this as a crime. That's the way immigration is enforced for black and brown people. White people who overstay their visas, who don't have their papers, who whatever have you, who are working on when they don't have a work visa, whatever, are not being arrested and criminalized the way that you are seeing this being treated for black and brown people. But
it becomes like an administrative procedural issue as opposed to like a criminal issue. Right.
Exactly. The reason that's acceptable is for the same reason that people consider policing acceptable in America, because that's exactly how policing functions, where they are supposed to, the same way I just gave the traffic court example, they could give an infraction. This could be administrative, but they choose to make it criminal for certain people. And that's exactly because that's already the normal function of our criminal system operates. That's why ICE is like, it's not theoretical. It is just policing. It's just another arm of policing. And this is just where people consider it acceptable. I don't see them raiding Little Italy. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
They're not running down Little Italy. America head would spin right now if on TV a bunch of Italians was getting rounded up in the streets. You know what I mean? If they was going again, who have just the same way. They running down little Haiti, they running down all little Cuba, they running down all these different places. They have all those same things for white immigrant populations and non-black immigrant populations, but they're not going after them in that same way because that's who they choose to criminalize. And as let me just say, bring in 2 historical notes. What's funny is in the 19th century, though, they did run down on them Italians. You know what I mean? Yes. And I think people who watch your show are educated to know that, Italians had to become white. And unfortunately, a lot of the way that they became white was actually through the issue of policing themselves, but initially they were. So that's just an interesting note how it's funny. You can go back and read papers in the 19th century and they talking about Italians, even Irish, the same grimy way they talk about black folks. Decision. Yeah, they made a decision. But now, and the other thing I wanted to say was funny. You were talking about traffic and saying that why is traffic a criminal issue? Interestingly, in the history, police didn't used to deal with traffic. And when you read about August Vollmer, who's one of the sort of fathers, they call him the fathers of modern policing. He was like a police chief in Oakland, but he did all these things to quote unquote revolutionize policing. But one of the things he really was like, police should not cover traffic. He was like, it's going to take up all our attention and it makes the public hate us. And and so that was actually also, as you're saying, not something that's natural. Like you just, of course the police. No, that was like a big controversial decision because again, now you got somebody with a gun. You're creating all these issues. I agree with you. A pro-immigrant narrative is what needs to happen. But that's the one thing I genuinely feel. I feel no faith in the ability to move the needle on how people receive immigrants.
Well, look. First of all, we got rid of Eric Adams in favor of Mamdani. And Mamdani took a pro-immigration stand. Yeah. And Adams did not. And the voters went with Mamdani. So this is not impossible. We have a lack of courage. And part of the problem, right, is that the center of the Democratic Party has been committed to an economic system that is bad for working class people, that has shifted jobs around the world, that has lowered the standard of living, that has gotten rid of unions, that provided basic benefits and decent pay to people. And Trump weaponized that anger against immigrants who are in no way responsible for any of that. And the Democrats have no alternative. They do not have an actual economic plan for working Americans. And so they're stuck. So they're just like, well, we're also anti-immigrant, but we're going to be a little nicer about it. And that's no choice. So what we need is a real economic populism from the left that actually has a plan for working Americans. And so DSA is trying to do that. And at times Bernie Sanders and others have tried to do that, and that's what's needed. And that plan has to be pro-immigrant. Yeah. And we have to turn the attention to the banks, to the multinational corporations, to Wall Street that are actually the source of our declining standard of living, not migrants working jobs that Americans don't want at pay that they won't accept.
I'm glad that Alex brought up Zohran Mamdani because Mamdani's mayorship is exactly what we should be thinking of when we think of some of the progressive wins we've had since 2020. So I, of course, had to take advantage of being able to have Mamdani's community safety advisor here to answer my questions about what he's doing about crime, safety, and policing in New York City. How do you feel about how Mamdani is handling the issue of policing and criminal justice? Especially, and you're his abolition advisor, right? So yeah, I would love to hear what you think about how Mamdani is handling criminal justice and policing.
So we've got these two things. We've got the dialing back of policing, and we've got the ramping up of alternatives. So the ramping up of alternatives is happening. A new, Office of Community Safety has been created, and top staff have been hired, and researchers and policy people and inside government people. And I'm talking to them on a regular basis, and they have gotten a big infusion of resources in the last budget, and they are ramping up an expansion on a bunch of fronts. reducing gender-based violence, reducing community violence, making the subways safer, addressing hate crimes, and creating a more robust civilian mental health crisis response capacity. So I think this is really happening, and it's very exciting. On the policing side, we have not seen much improvement. So it seems clear there's been some kind of political calculation to kind of let the police commissioner do her thing. And, I've been willing to sort of put up with a certain amount of that as we ramp up the alternatives.
Yeah.
But there have been some concerning moments, some messaging from the mayor that failed to really center the coming alternatives, that lean too much into policing. And then most concerning was this initial proposal to hire 580 more police that came from the police commissioner, that the mayor kind of acceded to, but then we mobilized a big pushback against that, and he took it out of the budget.
Okay, good.
So it's concerning that he even allowed this idea to get floated.
Yeah.
But in the end, he did pull it back. He did not agree to hire more police. He has kept to the campaign promise. And my hope is that as the Office of Community Safety expands, gets more robust, that will be in a stronger position to do things like dial back police overhead time, which is hugely expensive, like $1 billion a year, and also to allow attrition to kind of start bringing down the police head count. And I'll just point out that under Mayor Bloomberg's 12 years in office, 11 of those 12 years, he allowed the size of the police department to shrink through attrition. And every one of those years, crime dropped in New York
I didn't
City.
know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It is really possible to significantly shrink the police department without any sacrifice to public safety.
I'm always, not that I often have reason that I even want to criticize Mamdani. I really like Mamdani, what Mamdani is doing. But even when I think about theoretically, like if I had to criticize, if there was something I disagreed with, like, or I, wanted to be critical of, I'm reluctant to criticize Mamdani because, I like him. I like what he's doing. Like when you think about what we last had and what we wanted, like he's such a material benefit, you know what I mean? And I ultimately see him as good and well-intentioned, and I recognize kind of the positions he's in. I tend to think similarly to you, and you're like, oh, obviously some kind of political calculus is made. And I'm always thinking, like, for him to do all these things and be who he is and be what he is, obviously there has to be some push and pull. I understand to some degree. What I am happy to hear is that, Mamdani, I believe these are his values in the first place. It's not like I believe that he wants to, hire 500 or 600 more police officers. So I understand why he would be receptive, you know what I mean, to what we say when he's pushed on that. And so I'm glad for that. And I have a similar position to you of like, okay, I see you doing a lot of good stuff. I'm gonna hope you get to a little something, like,
I think that we can be like pro Mamdani and still publicly be critical of specific things.
Yeah.
So when he was talking about hiring more police, I appeared in the New York Times criticizing the decision.
Yeah.
Right. I did not just keep it to myself.
Yeah.
And I encouraged others. I helped with the writing of letters and the staging of protests, and but the tone of these was not, we got to get rid of Mamdani.
Right.
The tone was, this is a bad policy decision and you need to change it.
Right.
And we're still ready to work with you. So we can disagree with someone without canceling them.
No, I completely agree. It's unfortunate sometimes things get conflated, because I feel like even sometimes when you make your nuanced critique and you make it clear that you're not calling for, you're not standing in opposition to this person overall, people who do want it to be that way can take it and run with it. And so that is often sometimes my concern. I have seen his that he's making some material steps towards closing Rikers. Have you seen anything about that? Do you know anything about what he's doing with Rikers, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, so the exciting news is that they actually closed down an entire facility. So Rikers Island, most people probably don't realize, is not like a building. It's an island with an archipelago of jails of lots of different kinds. And so one of the ways to concretely move towards closing Rikers is to reduce the population, and as you do that, to empty out specific facilities and close them down.
Yeah.
And he not only closed this facility, he transferred ownership away from the Department of Corrections to a different agency so that the Department of Corrections no longer has any jurisdiction over that property.
So they can't take it and turn it
So
into
they can't just say, oh, we've got an emergency, we're going to stuff some people in there.
Right.
No, they have to manage now without that space. And as we bring the population down more, we can close additional facilities. And I think that's the responsible way to handle this. We have seen some investments in the kinds of alternative initiatives that are needed to allow us to further draw down the population. Emergency beds for people with mental health crisis, for instance, some diversion programs. And so it's going to take a while, in part because of the legacies of Adams, who just stuffed the jail full of people, and frankly, because of the current commissioner who continues to pursue broken windows policing, which generates huge numbers of low-level arrests that churns people through the courts and Rikers. And we've got to bring a stop to that. And once we do, that will further reduce the population at Rikers.
Explain what broken window policing is for the people who don't know, have never heard that term.
So broken windows policing is the idea, and it's just an idea, there's no evidence to support it, that if the police make huge numbers of low-level kind of harassment arrests, that this will somehow magically prevent shootings from happening, or burglaries, or car thefts, or other serious crime. This has never been proven to be true, but it has become a kind of canon of policing. This sort of, they do it on faith now. They all believe this is how you drive crime down. And it contributes to things like widespread abuses of stop and frisk, and just the needless criminalization of vulnerable populations.
I don't know if we know yet. You would know better than me if there's any like studies or stats on it yet. Have we seen any kind of meaningful decrease in stop and frisk since MAMDANI has taken over from Eric Adams because of how that fool had brought it back in full effect?
Not really, no, we haven't. And low-level arrests are actually up. So this is a real problem, and it directly interferes with Mamdani's pledge to dial down our reliance on Rikers Island. It's a real problem, and we got to keep the pressure on him, and we got to keep building up the alternatives.
I understand, obviously, why policing is the issue, that they're one of his most serious commitments he made, one of the things he ran on that he seems to be shying away from. I understand New York City politics and all of the people and institutions that pop up to act a fool about policing. So I understand it, but that still doesn't excuse it for me, in the sense I'm like, I know a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of people and a lot of New Yorkers will be happy about a lot of other different things he's done and will do during the course of his term, but I personally don't think if all those things happen, if every other promise gets met, but policing goes exactly as it's been going, that would be insufficient to me. Yeah,
of course I agree. Now, just to be clear, he campaigned on not hiring more police and building this office / Department of Community Safety, and he is doing that.
Yeah.
He did not campaign particularly on a program of police reform or police accountability. You know, he said a few things like he had skepticism about the gang database, and he had skepticism about using police to target sex workers, and he, had a desire to kind of strengthen civilian review a little bit. Those things have not happened yet. It's only been 6 months.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to keep the pressure on. I, for one, want to see the gang database eliminated. I want to see the end of using police to harass sex workers. I want to see an end to broken windows policing. But we have to build the politics to make that possible. And so my priority right now is working with groups who are doing organizing at the grassroots level that includes political education about the need to dial back policing and the kinds of alternatives we could put in place instead. Because there's still a lot of people who either believe in things like police reform, although the number of people who believe in that, I think, is shrinking.
Yeah.
There's other people whose primary concern is quote unquote accountability in the form of disciplining officers who engage in quote unquote misconduct. I think that's a dead end. I don't think that gets us better policing or safer communities. And then there continue to just be a lot of folks who turn to the police to solve their problems because they don't think there's anything else. And we have to convince all those groups that there is something else that will be much more effective at keeping them safe. Safe from people in the community and also safe from the police.
Y'all know your girl has merch, right? That's right. The Olurinattiverse has merch, so you can rep your favorite channel. Whether you're an Olurinatti pop girl like myself, an Olay and chill enthusiast like my baby sister, an Olay and friends stan like all my friends, somebody who likes to scream with me on Olurinatti Bites, or somebody who locks in for a 2-hour Olurinatti production, we've got something for you. We've got mugs, shirts, and hats. It's all very cute because Cartoon Me is adorable. Shout out to Toonrific Tariq for being the man behind her. And to my pop watchers in particular, please know that you wore me down and I finally gave y'all a shoot me with your big gun merch that y'all kept begging for. Look how cute your shoot me with your big gun merch is. Oh my God, to be an Olurinatti pop girly. But I genuinely love my merch, not just because it's mine, but because I ordered everything myself before showing it to y'all so I could make sure the quality was good, because I could not have y'all spending y'all hard-earned money on garbage, which is why I am pleased to report that I have a cupboard full of the most beautiful glossy mugs and a drawer full of the comfiest Olurinatti shirts. So if you've ever wanted to support the channel or rep your favorite corner of the Olurinattiverse, or just walk around with my cartoon face on your chest like a true fan, check out the merch store linked in the description below, or go to olurinatti-shop.fourthwall.com to make sure you get your Olurinatti merch. Again, that's olurinatti-shop.fourthwall.com, or click the link in the description below, or use the QR code on screen to run me your money today. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, congratulations! You've officially wandered into the Olurinattiverse. Now, before you get overwhelmed, let me explain where exactly you've landed, because apparently one YouTube channel was not enough for me. If you're looking for my biggest productions, the kinds of videos that require me to disappear into a cave for 6 weeks and emerge with an existential crisis, subscribe to Olurinatti, my flagship channel, where you'll find my magnum opuses like If Pretty is a Privilege, Ugly is a Curse, How This Didn't Age Well Destroyed Media Literacy, How Men Become Aziz Ansari, Why Serial Killers Aren't Monsters, and so much more. If you're here because you love television, movies, and hearing me explain why everybody misunderstood your favorite character, subscribe to Olurinatti Pop, my TV and film essay channel. That's where you'll find fun deep dives on How I Met Your Mother, Sex and the City, Desperate Housewives, You, Euphoria, Insecure, Girlfriends, and more. And if you'd like to watch my videos uncensored, get early access, and support the channel directly, just join the Olurinatti Pop Patreon. If you are looking for chaos and a good time, subscribe to Olay and Chill, where I unpack reality TV, TikTok drama, documentaries, chaos in internet, and whatever nonsense the internet has cooked up this week. If you'd like to watch me and some of my favorite Black creators and thinkers come together to discuss the culture, subscribe to Olay and Friends. If you're looking for shorter commentary on whatever the internet is currently spiraling about or whatever's on my mind, subscribe to Olurinatti Bites. If you want to watch me and my bitch Kenny JD laugh, overshare, talk a little shit, and unpack the messiness of life, love, and the internet, and whatever foolishness we watching, subscribe to Olay and Kenny. If politics is more your thing and where you know me from, subscribe to Olurinatti Politics for my State of the Union like addresses on O2. And if music is your thing and you want to hear what I think about the latest albums and what I'm getting into, subscribe to Olurinatti Extras. Subscribe to whichever corners of the Olurinattiverse speak to you, or subscribe to all of them and become a full-time resident. And while you're at it, you can follow me everywhere: Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Twitter at Olurinatti. You can also follow Olurinatti Pop and Olay and Chill and Olay and Friends on social media so you never miss a thing. Welcome again to the Olurinattiverse. Now go look around a little bit, make yourself at home.